out of our way. So I dramatically urge the House to pass the manager's amendment with these sound provisions that will make a big difference, and again ask for consideration of the manager's amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment is offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a roll call. Yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report 111246. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 112-46, offered by Ms. Waters of California.
House Resolution 189, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Waters, and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment requires airport operators, as a condition for receiving grants under the Airport Improvement Program, to consult on a regular basis with representatives of the local community regarding airport operations and their impact on the community. Airports and airport operations have a profound impact on the communities that surround them. Airplanes takeoffs and landings can make noise that interrupts families in their homes and workers in their offices. Daytime takeoffs can interrupt school children who are trying to learn and teachers who are trying to teach. Nighttime takeoffs can make it difficult for local residents to sleep. Jet fuel emissions and other harmful pollutants contribute to air pollution, and traffic congestion surrounding an airport adds to the noise and to the pollution. Needless to say, airports play an important role in our economy and our society, but airport operators should make every possible effort to be good neighbors in their communities. Being a good neighbor simply means consulting with the local community regarding airport operations. It means minimizing the nighttime takeoffs and landings so that residents can sleep. It means assisting families with residential noise mitigation programs, such as retrofitting windows, doors, sidings, and insulation to help keep aircraft noise to a minimum. It means consulting with local residents and small businesses regarding plans to expand, upgrade, or realign runways and other airport facilities, and listening to their concerns. My amendment requires airport operators that receive Airport Improvement Program grants to consult on a regular basis regarding airport operations and their impact on the community. Airport operators would be required to include in these consultations local residents who are impacted by airport operations. Airport operators could specifically be required to include any organization, the membership of which includes at least 20 people who reside within 10 miles of the airport, that notifies the operator of its desire to be consulted. This amendment is not overly burdensome for airports, and it does not cost money for the federal government. It merely requires airport operators to be good neighbors, and it holds them accountable to the communities that they serve. Mr. Chairman and members, I have one of the world's largest airports in my district, and they do a good job, but I'm constantly contacted by residents in the surrounding community who are raising questions about new plans, new operations, airport noise, and other kinds of things that if the airport operators were in communications with the communities in some kind of formalized way, they would have a better understanding. It's not that these neighbors are saying we don't want these airports. As a matter of fact, we're pleased that we have LAX in our community. It is job intensive, and we like the idea that the people who work there are able not only to earn a good living, but they live in the community, they contribute to the economy of the community. We're simply just talking about urging and encouraging a relationship where the airport operators share with the schools and with the residents what they're doing. Oftentimes, it would just make for a better understanding. And it's not always controversial, it's not always confrontational, but it is shining a light on what's going on and getting people cooperating and understanding the operations of the airport. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from California yields back her time. The gentleman from Wisconsin in opposition to the amendment.
Yes, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Would like my colleague from California to know that we recognize that this is a very well-intended amendment and it is addressing a concern, particularly with the tremendous airport in your area. You have a later amendment that deals with the same subject that we think is more workable and better. The concern we have has to do with there are a number of provisions in law already requiring airports to consult with local communities in a variety of situations. And we're just afraid that this particular amendment could be more of a one-size-fits-all approach across the whole country that could create problems rather than solving them. And therefore, we're looking forward to working with you on amendment number 32, but I do oppose the current amendment as being too broad and yes.
Do I understand that the other amendment that I have coming up that's more specific to Los Angeles is something that you would be more inclined to cooperate on rather than this amendment?
Yes.
Well, that's fine, because I do know that this amendment that I'm offering is a national amendment that would cause all of the airports to come in compliance with this kind of cooperative effort. And if, in fact, the gentleman is offering cooperation on the next amendment, I would withdraw this one.
Thank you. We thank you with that understanding.
Does the gentlelady ask unanimous consent to withdraw her amendment?
Yes, sir.
Is there objection? Seeing none, the amendment is withdrawn. It's now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in House Report 1112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman
Designated Waters Amendment number 31 in the rule.
That amendment number 31, pursuant to the rule, is not in order at this time.
That is the amendment that the gentleman just agreed cooperation on.
Put to the rule.
Is there some mistake here? What is this?
The amendment as offered by the gentlelady from California will be considered later as...
Thank you. It will come later. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Puerto Rico seek recognition?
I have an amendment at
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Pierluisi of Puerto Rico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierluisi, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer this amendment to codify the method by which the Secretary of Transportation is to allocate annual formula grants to airports in Puerto Rico for capital development and planning. The amendment is simple and straightforward and serves to clarify current law. It ensures that at a minimum, the Secretary will allocate formula grants under the Airport Improvement Program to airports in Puerto Rico, no differently than the Secretary allocates such grants to other airports throughout the United States. The amendment also ensures that the Secretary will not be precluded for any reason from making project grants to airports in Puerto Rico from the discretionary fund under the Airport Improvement Program. And the amendment makes clear that formula grants and discretionary grants for airports in Puerto Rico should not be deemed mutually exclusive. It is critical to note that the Airport Improvement Program is funded by a variety of user fees and fuel taxes, all of which apply in Puerto Rico. so there is no reasonable basis to treat Puerto Rico less than equally under the program, especially since aviation serves such a critical role on the island. Puerto Rico is a non-contiguous U.S. jurisdiction located over 1,000 flight miles from the nearest large hub airport in the National Air Transportation Network. Accordingly, Puerto Rico is heavily dependent on safe and reliable air service to carry passengers and transport goods to and from the U.S. mainland. The island's main airport, the Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport in San Juan, is ranked among the top 50 commercial service airports in the United States in terms of the number of passenger boardings, averaging over 4.5 million boardings each year. In addition to travel to and from the mainland United States, residents of Puerto Rico and visitors to the island rely on air service to travel to points within the main island of Puerto Rico and between the main island and other outer island municipalities of Vieques and Culebra. Apart from the San Juan International Airport, Puerto Rico is home to 5 other commercial service airports located in Aguadilla, Ponce, Mayagüez, Isla Grande, and Vieques. And we have 5 other general aviation airports serving smaller communities. According to the FAA, approximately $285 million is needed over the next 5 years to bring Puerto Rico's airports up to current design standards, add capacity to meet projected needs, and to improve safety. My amendment simply ensures, Mr. Chairman, that Puerto Rico's public use airports can access essential federal funding on the same terms as airports elsewhere in the country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Although I claim time in opposition, I am going to speak in support of this amendment. I have the greatest respect from the delegate, Congressman from Puerto Rico, also highest esteem the Governor Fortunio, a former delegate, representative to this body, 2 great young leaders, and he's here today trying to ensure that Puerto Rico is treated like any other airport in the United States in terms of airport improvement programs. And I think his amendment clarifies that Puerto Rico also remains eligible for grants from the AIP discretionary fund. And I also know Mr. Perlusi is willing to work with me on his other amendment, which deals with the Central Air Service, and I had offered to work with other members, and I'll state for the record that I will work with him, and I'm hoping that if he offers it, he'll withdraw it, because I'm going to support this amendment. And I think he has a good amendment here, and I would like to work with him on his other provision, but I would hope that he would work with us in that regard. So this amendment simply provides clear direction to the FAA that Puerto Rico airports should be treated equitably, and I'll support this amendment at this time and urge a yes vote.
Gentleman yield back his time.
How much time is remaining on each side?
The gentleman from Florida has 3.5 minutes. The gentleman from Puerto Rico has yielded back his time.
I'm sorry, Mr.
The
Chairman.
gentleman from Puerto Rico has 2 minutes remaining.
I'll reserve to maybe he has a little response to my support for his amendment.
Gentleman from Puerto Rico.
No, I thank the gentleman from Florida. Even though he rises in opposition, I'm pleased that as chairman of the Committee of Jurisdiction, he's supporting this amendment. So under these circumstances, I just ask him if he has any other, if he expects any other member to make a statement on the floor.
I don't, but I was hoping that you would say you'd be willing to, the gentleman from Puerto Rico would be willing to work with me on his other amendment, and I'm sure he will. But I still will support his amendment because I'm that kind of a guy. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Puerto Rico.
I'll simply say that I'll have some time to consider your offer to work with you on my other amendment, which is not now on the floor. But till then, I simply urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Puerto Rico. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment's adopted. It is now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in House Report 1112-46. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the table.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Ms. Hirono of Hawaii.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii.
Thank you. I rise to speak in favor of this amendment. Geographically, Hawaii is the world's most isolated archipelago. It is the only U.S. state made up completely of islands. There are 4 counties in Hawaii, all of which are separated by a body of water. Air travel is the fastest and most effective means of transportation between our islands. It is also the mode of transportation that we rely on most for moving goods and other cargo and even our daily mail. The 15 airports operated by the Airports Division of the Hawaii Department of Transportation are responsible for maintaining safe and efficient facilities that accommodate approximately 25 million passengers a year. This is a tremendous responsibility and an ongoing challenge. It is because of the fundamental role that air travel plays in the day-to-day lives of the people of Hawaii and commerce of Hawaii that Congress saw fit to provide the state with an exemption from charging passenger facility fees, or PFCs, on inter-island flights. These are the flights between our islands. This exemption is important for Hawaii residents. Without it, for many, the daily commute would be unduly burdensome. I know many people who live on Oahu, for example, who commute to work on one of the other islands. It would be as if you or any of your constituents got in your car to go to work, then had to pay $4.50, which is our PFC fee, just to leave your driveway, and then had to pay another $4.50 upon your return. While we greatly appreciate and seek to preserve this exemption, there have been unintended consequences with regard to its impact on federal funds for Hawaii's airports. This is because of the way that PFCs impact the formula funding that is apportioned to each state under the Airport Improvement Program, or the AIP. As my colleagues know, AIP grants are awarded to each state based on a formula. For airports that opt to collect PFCs, formula funds are cut by either 50 or 75%. This reduction depends on the amount of PFC charged. For airports that assess PFCs on 100% of their passengers, this arrangement works well. However, in the case of Hawaii, the 2 airports that collect PFCs only collect them on a portion of the passengers at these airports. At our large hub airport in Honolulu, 38% of our passengers are inter-island travelers. Inter-island travelers also constitute 51% of the passengers served by our medium hub at Kahului Airport on Maui. Therefore, the $4.50 PFC being assessed at Honolulu is only being paid by 62% of its passengers, and on Maui, that amount is only 49% of the passengers. Based on the current formula, the Hawaii Department of Transportation calculates that the state is losing approximately $5.7 million this year in AIP formula entitlement funds. My amendment would change the formula under which Hawaii's PFCs and entitlements are calculated to correct this inequity. I want to be clear to my colleagues, this amendment is intended only to ensure that Hawaii gets its full fair share under the AIP program. Hawaii's airports would still be subject to the same 75% reduction as any other airport charging a $4.50 PFC. The calculation will simply take into account the percentage of passengers traveling inter-island and therefore not paying a PFC. I also want to point out that this is not a windfall for the state or, in my view, an earmark. In fact, House Rule 21, Clause 9, Paragraph E, parenthetical E, the definition for earmark, defines an earmark essentially as any member-requested federal assistance to a targeted entity or locality other than through a statutory or administrative formula.
Would the gentlelady...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was so intent on my message.
Would the gentlelady yield? We've reviewed your amendment, and based on the recommendation of the FAA, I think Chairman Mica and I are prepared to accept your amendment. We would also ask, however, that you consider working with us on the amendment that you've intended to offer later. It's in an area that is already within the FAA's jurisdiction where they're working, but not as hard as you would like, and we think we could continue to work with you on that. But we would accept this amendment.
I want to thank the Subcommittee Chair Petri for that, and Mr. Mica for accepting my amendment. I would like to reserve, am I over my 5 minutes?
It has expired.
Thank you very much. And I do want to offer my other amendment, however.
Does any member rise in opposition? Gentleman from Florida? The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay. I rise in opposition. I actually will support the amendment, but wanted to give the gentlelady an additional minute to conclude if she had any remarks. And as I said, we're very willing to work with her on her next amendment, and hope she would consider working with us. And we will support this amendment. But I would like to yield, if I may, Mr. Chairman, as much time as she needs to finish her statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In view of the fact that you are in agreement with my amendment, I would, if you would be so kind as to yield a minute of your time for my colleague, Colleen Hanabusa, to submit her remarks on this amendment.
I'm pleased to allow them to submit
Does
their...
the gentleman yield time to...
Yes, I'll be glad to submit time.
Thank you.
We are taking the amendment, and I know she's going to work with us, but I'd also be pleased to yield to our colleagues.
Thank you.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Chair across the way for doing this wonderful gesture. I'd like to thank Congresswoman Hirono for offering this amendment, and that it does address the unique nature of Hawaii. Hawaii's people have only really one way for commercial travel between our islands, and that is by way of air. So what this has done is it's leveled the playing field for us in terms of the ability to have our fair share of the airport improvements, but in addition, to do the best things we can do is to protect our consumers. So thank you again for agreeing to the amendment, and thank you to Maisie for offering it. Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Florida.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent this letter in support of the bill be submitted for the record.
The submission will be considered in general leave.
Unless the gentlelady needed more time, I'm prepared to support this amendment that is pending.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Hawaii. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment's agreed to. It's now in order to consider amendment number 5, printed in House Report 1112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Yeah. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Nagelbauer of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagelbauer, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Mica and Chairman Hall and Congressman Graves for their support of this amendment. I appreciate the work of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and various stakeholder groups that have helped through this amendment process. You know, in recent years, our lives and our world has changed. We have a much more digital world today, and we have a lot more towers that provide us cell service, internet service, We have a new industry that is basically taking over a big part of my district into the wind energy industry. And so over the countryside, the landscape has changed, and we have a lot of new towers and windmills and wind turbines and all sorts of things that are beneficial to our economy, but also provide a certain amount of hazard for those people in the aviation industry. In recent years, we've had a number of fatalities due to low-flying aviators that didn't know the existence of one of these obstacles. And so one of the things that this amendment does is really, it's a common sense thing that says it makes sense for the FAA to conduct a study of how we can put together a database of where these new obstacles are, giving their GPS location, allowing people to access that information that are going to be flying in that area or utilizing that area. Also providing an opportunity for planning purposes for new infrastructure in those areas. And so we really think that this is a very common sense amendment, provides for safety, and that this study hopefully will yield some very positive results that will be beneficial to the aviation industry. And with that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Who claims time in opposition to the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from Florida.
Although I'm not opposed to the amendment, I ask unanimous consent to claim the time in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Micah and Ranking Member Ray Hall for their work in bringing this bill to the floor. I think that the aviation community deserves a long-term aviation bill so that they can plan for the future need of the traveling public. We have had 18 extensions already, and it is time for the House and the Senate to find a compromise and send the bill to the President. Sadly, we're missing a great opportunity to invest in our airports, allowing them to prepare for the expected growth in the air traffic and put people to work improving our aviation infrastructure. Without additional PFC revenue and AMT relief, airports will have little capital to invest in their facilities. We keep talking about creating jobs and rebuilding the economy, but we don't do anything about it. My home state of Florida relies on air service to support our tourist-based economy. We have 20 primary airports, 22 relief airports, and 57 general aviation airports, with our top 3 airports generating nearly 45 million enplanements a year. These airports create jobs and help grow the economy, and we're not going to get out of the recession we're in by starving our airports of funds for our infrastructure. This bill does address an important issue in my district by preserving access to the Military Airport Program, MAP. The MAP program provides critical support to those communities which have given the responsibility of converting close military bases to civilian use. The participation of Cecil Field Airport, which is just outside of Jacksonville, is a primary example of how this program can successfully transform from military airfield to commercial service and help turn and strengthen the nation's aviation system. In the case of Cecil Field, which continues to include uses by the Air National Guard and the Reserve Unit, making this a win-win for the community and for the military. And I want to add that we have more landers now than we did before we turned the facility over. MAP grants also support projects that are generally not eligible for AIP funds, but which are typically needed for successful civilian conversions such as surface parking lots, fuel farms, hangars, utility system, access roads, and cargo buildings. I know this bill still have a long way to go in the process, so I hope we can make improvements as we move to conference, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from Texas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield a minute to the distinguished chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Michael.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Well, thank you, and I just rise in strong support of the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Neugebauer. He has worked with the committee in drafting this amendment, done an excellent job, and We also have the support of FAA on this amendment, so we're supportive, and I ask everyone to join in passage of this well-crafted amendment.
Gentleman from Texas.
It's also my pleasure now to yield a minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I rise in support of this amendment as well. With off-the-shelf available technology, this type of mapping can be done at little or no cost, increasing safety to aviation, especially those involved in rural aviation like crop dusters and the like. And I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield a minute and a half to the Chairman of the House Small Business Committee, Mr. Graves.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to rise in support, very strong support of the gentleman's amendment. Having flown for over 20 years, I've had firsthand experience with low altitude or low level obstacles that are out there. I had to make some last-minute corrections just to avoid them. If we had some way to understand where those obstacles are, a very simple method, it would greatly improve safety. Just in the crop duster world alone, we've had 9 deaths in the last 10 years from obstacles that are unmarked, unlighted, and we don't have any idea where they are. And so I would very much be in support of this amendment. I thank the gentleman for offering it. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, did they yield back over there? Yes. Well, I just would close by saying this is a very common sense amendment. I think it uses the technology of today to bring air safety to our country, and I would encourage all members to support this amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. All those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. Continue to chair. The ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment's adopted. So now, in order to consider amendment number 6, printed in House Report 1112-46, for what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Lobiondo of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking Chairman Mica. I'd like to also thank Mr. Petri and Mr. Costello. And this is a very simple amendment. It allows the FAA to assist in establishing the Next Generation Research and Development Center of Excellence. The center would leverage the FAA's existing Centers of Excellence program, a program that relies on university partnerships to address ongoing FAA research and development challenges. The Next Generation of Research and Development, the Next Gen Research and Development Center of Excellence would provide educational, technical, and analytical assistance to the FAA and other agencies involved in the development of NextGen. In essence, it would be a force multiplier. The NextGen is a complete revamping of our national airspace system from the current radar-based system to a state-of-the-art satellite or GPS-based technology. Once fully implemented, NextGen will provide a host of benefits from more precise tracking of aircraft, fuel savings, and noise reduction. As a result, the entire aviation community would be benefited, as would the nation. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Yes, I yield time to the chairman of the committee, Mr. Petri.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo. I'd rise in support of this amendment, and I know the chairman of the full committee has looked at it and supports it as well. It gives the FAA administrator the ability to designate a next-gen center on a competitive basis, and it would be a good and needed resource for the FAA, and therefore I would urge a yes vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves his time. Does the gentleman from Illinois claim time in opposition to the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I do, although I will not oppose.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, we support the gentleman's amendment. This is a provision that was contained in the FAA bill that was passed, H.R. 915 and H.R. 1586, that passed this Congress with bipartisan support. We strongly support the gentleman's amendment, and ask our colleagues to support it as well. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time has expired. The questions on the amendment is offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. There's no sign of it. Oh, there he is. For what purpose? It is now in order to consider amendment number 7, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
So there you go. Hey, I have the amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Garrett of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank the chair. And so, to the chair, I shall be brief on this. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, which is actually a longer amendment than just the Garrett amendment. It's the Garrett-Himes-Andrew-Engel amendment. And in it, the FAA's New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia airspace redesign plan, which would redirect thousands of flights per year over the other sponsors of the bill as well. Looking at this, we realize this has a very real and negative impact upon the region, including a potential for a decrease in home values. You see that new flight patterns, which would be considered here, over the region should not be implemented until a thorough study of alternatives is actually presented to Congress. Now, this amendment prohibits the FAA from continuing implementation of the airspace redesign until it has conducted a study on alternative designs. To do what end is that? To reduce delays at the 4 airports considered in the redesign. Finally, it is imperative that the FAA consider the concerns of the people that are and have been afflicted by this action. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment.
Does the gentleman reserve his time?
I reserve my time.
Who claims time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, have the greatest respect from the gentleman from New Jersey, and I understand his predicament. He has been one of the strongest advocates for his district, and some of the potential problems that might arise from airspace redesign. I've had the opportunity to travel to the gentleman's district and meet with his constituents who have raised great concerns about the New York airspace redesign. Now, this does put in place another study of the airspace redesign, and unfortunately it delays implementation of airspace redesign in the Northeast Corridor in that New York airspace until that's complete. So that's why I have to oppose this. Now, work with the gentleman in trying to make certain that FAA treats them fairly and that there are hearings. Now, we've had 120 hearings. I've been in every jurisdiction from Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, all the way up into Connecticut, which is part of the New York airspace, in hearings and public meetings. There have been over 120 FAA meetings. This has been drugged through the courts, and finally there were suits, and they were all consolidated, and the issues again were resolved, and FAA should go forward with airspace redesign and address the concerns, continue to address the concerns of the gentleman. Why is this important to everyone here? Because more than 70% of the chronically delayed flights around the United States start in the New York airspace. That means when New York goes down, the whole country starts going down. Now, you got to understand that this battle's been going on for nearly 2 decades, and in and out of court and fights and everything for the redesign. So what we're left with is a corridor for airspace that is sort of like having US 1 going into New York City 20 or 30 years ago and not expanding or revising the capacity. So that's why we have this situation. That's why I strongly urge not the adoption of this, willing to work with the gentleman and try to, again, make certain that the concerns. We do have quieter aircraft, and when we started this debate, and I don't want him to or his constituents to suffer, or any of the others in the New York airspace. But this has to come to a conclusion. Again, it affects everyone in the House of Representatives because more than 70% of our chronically delayed flights start in this area, and we have not been able to resolve this question. Reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Can the Chair tell us how much time we have left?
The gentleman from New Jersey has 4 minutes left.
Okay, I will yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York first.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, and I rise in strong support of his amendment. It's the Garrett-Himes-Andrews-Engel amendment. I rise today in strong support. This amendment will require the Federal Aviation Administration to study alternatives to the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia airspace redesign. It will also prohibit the FAA from continuing with the implementation of the airspace redesign until the new study is submitted to Congress. I have to take issue with what my friend the chairman said before. We have not found that there were hearings for this. This has been trying to, they've been trying to jam this through and want less and less people to know about it. I forced them to come into my district, but until that happened, they didn't want any kind of input from the community. I've opposed this airspace design from day one and have fought its implementation every step of the way. Time and time again, the FAA has pursued the airspace redesign while ignoring the concerns of my constituents in Rockland County, New York. This plan, which will only save minutes on flight time, but it will disrupt the lives of thousands of residents in my district who live under the new flight paths. As my constituents have noted to me, the noise and air pollution in the area will increase. It's unknown how this increase in air pollution will affect the disproportionate rate of childhood asthma in my district. The modernization of our aviation system is necessary to bring it into the 21st century, to keep pace with the increased number of flights, and to also maintain our technological advancements by implementing new equipment to keep our system the safest in the world. However, there are several alternatives to this plan, and I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment that would require the FAA to take them into consideration. We now learn that not only planes landing at Newark will fly over my constituents, but planes taking off from Kennedy as well. This is a double whammy. It's not fair. So I commend Mr. Garrett. I support this amendment, and I will continue to oppose the FAA reauthorization until the FAA halts and revises the airspace design and reports to Congress. After all, we're the ones that report to the people. They should report to us. The FAA should report to us. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
At this time, I will...
Gentleman from New Jersey?
Yeah, yield 1.5 minutes. Gentleman from Connecticut.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
I thank my good friend from New Jersey for yielding. And, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the amendment that is the desk. This amendment addresses the FAA's redesign of the airspace over New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia with noble motives to actually improve our air travel. But the fact of the matter is that the redesign was badly implemented from the start and used flawed procedures. Plans for this redesign have moved forward without proper and appropriate input from stakeholders and without regard to the parties who are most affected, notably many of our constituents. As planes have been rerouted to fly over southwestern Connecticut, upon descent into New York's airports, my constituents have begun experiencing unnecessary and unprecedented noise levels. A day does not go by that I don't hear this concern from my constituents. I've joined with my colleagues in a bipartisan effort to call upon the FAA to simply study alternatives. We know that there are good alternatives. This should be done prudently and carefully. Families who move to my district to find a quiet refuge are now faced with the prospect of daily disturbances. Alternatives must be considered before any more action is taken. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey? I reserve. Reserves. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Well, again, how much time do I have, may I ask?
Gentleman has 2 minutes.
Well, again, I have to say that I have the greatest respect for the gentleman, Mr. Garrett, the gentleman from New Jersey, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and the gentleman from New York. And they all do have interests here, and they're trying to protect them, and they're concerned about noise with the change of the New York airspace redesign. But again, this has been going on for 2 decades. We have a very narrow corridor. We do need to redesign it. We have safety questions now. We have the delays, chronic delays. 70% of them emanate from the New York. They start in this New York airspace, and then they ripple across the country. So 70% of the members are impacted by this particular provision. I appreciate their concern in asking for additional study, but what they do is, in the provisions they've offered, is delay implementation. We've just finished numerous court cases which were consolidated, which ruled against those in question, and I know it's difficult, but we've got to get this done. And again, I so much appreciate their looking out for their constituents, stating their concern and expressing in every way possible. I will continue to work with them and make certain that there is fairness to the implementation, and whatever they adopt does not disturb or unduly cause distress for their constituents. And that's all I can do, but I do have to oppose this amendment in the interests of the committee, the country, and the other members. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from New Jersey.
And just to conclude then, Mr. Speaker, the FAA's airspace redesign plan has not been responsive, as we've heard from the floor, to the concerns of our constituents, and it's not been comprehensive. Secondly, redesigning airspace would have little effect on delays while alternatives are considered. Finally, I ask the consideration of this bipartisan support to conduct a study on alternative designs. And with that, I encourage support for this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. All time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in House Report 112-46. Purposes of California seek recognition.
I think maybe the gentleman from Oregon, sir. Please.
Thank you very much. It is now.
Oh, okay. Filner's. He was 7. I'm 8. He said 8, but then he said California.
Thank you. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Thank you. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
I thank the chair. Mr. Speaker, my amendment is quite simple. It would require criminal background checks of mechanics at contract aircraft repair stations, both those domestically and those overseas. Now, the current law requires that people who repair aircraft at airports undergo criminal background checks that are quite extensive, because there's a concern if they have access to airplanes that we want to know who they are. We want to be sure they don't have a criminal background, and they can be denied employment for a large range of former felonies or problems, let alone any affiliation with terrorist groups. Not so at domestic contract repair stations or foreign contract repair stations. The employees there undergo no criminal background checks, or only criminal background checks at the discretion of the employer. They can be certified to do the most critical D-check work, overhauls on airplanes. Now, just think about it. As John Pistole recently said, he's the head of the Transportation Security Administration. For more than 2 decades, al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations have sought to do harm to this country. Many of their plots against the United States have focused on the aviation system. It's clear that terrorists' intent to strike at America targets has not diminished. Yet we're not doing criminal and security background checks of people who have access to the innards of the plane. They could replace one critical component, a bolt that holds on an engine, with one that looks like the real bolt that's actually fake and designed to fail. And if they, that could easily happen. And yet we are not requiring that they have background checks. Well, if Why are we requiring it at airports? If it's so critical, a mechanic who can access a plane at the airport, why isn't it critical for people who can get deep inside the plane in an overhaul overseas, far, far away from any prospective oversight by the TSA or the FAA? Now, some would say, well, the Transportation Security Administration, rather belatedly, 7 years after the fact, is working on a rule that will require them to adopt general procedures for security, but it will not require criminal or terrorist background checks. They will verify background information through confirmation of prior employment. Yes, I used to work for Osama bin Laden. You can call him. Here's his number. But now I don't work there anymore, and I'm here. This is, I think, a common-sense amendment. Now, the industry can say, oh, this will drive up the costs of repairs. Come on. It's $60 to do a TSA background check. $60. Now, don't you think it's worth $60? And is that going to drive, contract repair stations in the U.S. or overseas out of business that they have to confirm that their employees are not criminals or are not terrorists? I don't think so. So with that, I reserve the balance of my time and urge support of the amendment.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what reason, gentleman?
I rise in opposition. Claim time.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate the intent of the gentleman who is distinguished ranking member, former chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. And I think that the crafting of this amendment is somewhat flawed in that he does now require FAA to take their limited resources, and FAA is not a security agency, it's an aviation agency. And again, we have a jurisdictional question here. We can't put in provisions that require TSA to do certain things, but that is their responsibility. I understand this is also already done where the repair station is at the airport. TSA is in the process of promulgating a rule to address repair station security, but it appropriately is in their realm, not FAA. And we do get into trouble in trying to carry out some of these missions when we go to agencies that really this is not their responsibility. They're charter under Congress, and again, I think the gentleman's intent is good, but it's misapplied. So with that, I have to oppose the amendment as crafted. I'd be willing to work with him. There is a possibility of working with him, I think, and get it right. And again, I think his intention is good. But again, the assignment is misplaced, and it would cause more problems the way it's crafted than benefits. So with that, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time.
The gentleman of the balance time remaining on each side.
The gentleman from Florida has 3 minutes, and the gentleman from Oregon has 2 minutes.
Okay. With that, I'd yield 1 minute to Mr. Costello, the ranking member of the committee.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman, and I rise in support of his amendment. The amendment is very clear. It's simple. It's to the point. It requires the FAA, when certificating a repair station, whether domestic or foreign, to make sure that the repair station carries out consistent screening of its employees for criminal records. I mean, it is very clear. It's to the point. The amendment complies with all of our obligations under international law, and the amendment will move the FAA forward in creating one level of safety, both for domestic and international repair stations. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time to the gentleman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida.
Well, again, I rise claiming the balance of my time in opposition to the amendment. I believe the gentleman's intention is good. The problem I have is with the crafting of the amendment. Now, heaven knows there's probably been no one that's more critical of TSA. I helped create it, actually with Mr. DeFazio back in 2001. They have a lot of important responsibilities. One of them is clearly defined as aviation security, and it should be in repair stations. Quite frankly, I am concerned about beefing up some of that, getting some of the 3,700 bureaucrats that work and earn on average $105,000 just within miles of here, getting them relocated to where they can do their security function at a place that does pose risk, and that's some of these foreign locations. But this doesn't do the job. It complicates the assignment we have for FAA, and TSA is in a rulemaking process to address this responsibility, which is appropriately located within the purview and, again, jurisdiction of TSA. So I, again, oppose the opposition. We'll work with the gentleman and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Oregon.
I would yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I appreciate the chairman, and I have worked together with him well, and will continue to do that in the future. But we've got to differ on this. The TSA is not considering requiring criminal terrorist background checks as a requirement for overseas repair stations. I think that is an unbelievable loophole that should send shudders down the spine of anybody who flies planes that are being totally overhauled overseas. And all this does, it's very simple. It isn't going to require anybody from the FAA to do anything. It just says if a repair station is to be certificated by the FAA, the repair station, not the FAA, will have to perform background checks on its mechanics. It's as simple as that. Any mechanic at an airport has to undergo these background checks. They cost $60. How about having the contract repair stations do the same thing? Do you want a terrorist who's off the airport property to be working on an airplane critical component? Do you want a terrorist who's overseas working under, very little supervision, by the U.S. To have access to the most critical components of a plane? And the gentleman's an expert on aviation, and he knows you can take a critical component, and these are problems we have all the time, like a bolt that holds on an engine. We're trying to keep them out of the supply chain because you can make one for $3 that looks real, but it'll break. But a real bolt costs $10,000. So they could easily substitute parts designed to fail in critical components when a plane has had an overhaul overseas. I urge adoption of this common sense amendment. Let's not have the Al-Qaeda Full Employment Act.
All time is expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, at that, I would demand a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment 10, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Ms. Hirono of Hawaii.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Hawaii.
Thank you. I rise to speak in favor of this amendment, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak on this amendment. The basic idea of this amendment is to ensure the safety of the traveling public and those whose job it is to get them safely to their destinations. And my amendment has to do with smoke in the cockpit. And I do note that the FAA reauthorization bill that is under consideration today already acknowledges the concern about smoke in the cockpit because it requires the GAO to study what the FAA has done to address smoke in the cockpit. So my bill takes this concern to a more focused level by establishing an aviation rulemaking committee, an ARC, made up of representatives from aviation, labor, industry, and other experts. Their task would be to carefully examine and provide regulatory recommendations on the issue of cockpit smoke. This advisory committee will not cost the taxpayers any money, and this amendment does not mandate rulemaking. The administrator of the FAA would then review the recommendations and report to Congress on the steps that he or she will take to address them. And the problem of smoke in the cockpit is not new. In fact, my colleague from Hawaii, Senator Inoue, introduced legislation to address this matter as long ago as 1993. And I want to note his introductory remarks on the bill because 20 years later, we still have not adequately addressed this problem. In introducing his legislation in 1993, he said, quote, "My colleagues will be troubled to learn that over the last 20 years, there have been a dozen accidents on commercial aircraft in which dense, continuous smoke in the airline cockpit may have been a factor. In these accidents, over 850 people have died," end quote. That was in 1993. Almost another 20 years has passed. Since then, even more lives have been lost in accidents where cockpit smoke was a cause or a factor. And some will say that while tragic incidents such as these are rare and that there are already procedures in place to avoid them. Fortunately, yes, incidents that end in death are rare. However, I believe that available evidence tells a different story about the number of times when smoke in the cockpit comes about. According to a more recent report, the FAA's Information for Operators Bulletin, released on October 6, 2010, the FAA noted that they receive over 900 reports a year of smoke or fumes in the cabin or cockpit. An average of 900 incidents in 365 days does not seem to me to be a rare occurrence. I believe that our national response to this issue has been inadequate. We need a comprehensive, up-to-date analysis of the issue and real action next steps to protect our pilots and passengers. Therefore, I believe that my amendment is reasonable, logical, does not cost money, and it takes us toward resolving this issue. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment. With that, I retain the remainder of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of her time. What reason does the gentleman from Wisconsin rise?
I rise in opposition to